Planet Earth, our home. From the vantage point of space, astronauts get a unique perspective on the world.
We have this one tiny planet. We're just a speck in this universe.
This rock, spaceship Earth, is all we have.
We've got to make this planet work.
We really have to work together as a species.
Less than 650 people have seen this with their own eyes. But now, we can all share an astronaut's view. Every day, hundreds of satellites take millions of photographs, revealing planet Earth in a whole new way. From remote volcanoes, devastating hurricanes, the world's biggest music festivals, fires, floods, and armies ready for war. From space, you can see it all. And in 2022, there was more to see than ever before. On the cusp of 2022, satellites look down on a world starting to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Optimism is in the air. There are signs that life might return to normal. Above our heads, traveling at 27,000 kilometers an hour, satellites orbit the Earth every 90 minutes. As the year begins, they see cities around the globe coming back to life after lockdown. In Florida, visitors start to return to Disney World. In San Francisco, the 49ers welcome back their fans. And at the Metro Center in Gateshead, the car parks are full again. But it's not just human activity that can be seen from space. Satellites also capture the extraordinary power of the Earth escaping to the surface. Volcanoes like Etna smoking away in Sicily. In Indonesia, Krakatoa still glows almost 140 years after the devastating 1883 eruption. And in the middle of the Pacific Ocean lies the archipelago of Tonga. 65 kilometers north of the main island of Tonga Tapu lies the underwater volcano Hunga Tonga. At the beginning of 2022, volcanologists used satellite imagery to monitor its awakening.
It erupted semi-regularly, and we weren't particularly worried about Hunga volcano.
After 10 days, scientists conclude the activity is dying down. But Earth is full of surprises. On January the 15th, the island of Tonga Tapu is hit by a sonic boom. Caused by a massive eruption. It takes multiple satellites to capture the true scale of the blast. The plume of ash and gas that shoots into the stratosphere is measured by Shane Cronin.
The Hunga eruption ejected something in the order of 7 cubic kilometers of material.
Scientists calculate the power of this blast is equivalent to 4,000 Hiroshima bombs.
In the age of satellite imagery, this is by far the biggest eruption we've seen.
As the plume reaches the stratosphere, a pressure wave is tracked all around the world. The eruption generates hurricane-speed winds. It creates an underwater shockwave, cutting phone and internet cables linking Tonga to the world.
Roads are flooded, walls and fences have crumbled. Communications are crippled, leaving relatives in Australia desperate for news.
Satellite images become the only way of knowing what is happening on Tonga. They reveal the devastating scale of the eruption. Tonga's tropical landscape is covered in a thick layer of grey volcanic ash. On some islands, not a single house remains standing. So what sort of machine does it take to get these remarkable pictures? Picking out an individual house from 400 kilometers up. You'd imagine it would be pretty big.
Here is one of our satellites. This is not a scaled down model. It's actually the real size, so I can just about hold it in my hand. It does expand out with solar panels to take power from the sun. And the camera is at the back and the telescope's at the front, and so this is what's looking down as we take images across the whole Earth. Each satellite takes up to 8 images per second, and there's about 200 of these satellites, so we take about 4 million images per day.
In early February, satellites capture images from the outskirts of Beijing. They show previously brown hills, developing mysterious white trails. Turns out, this is the venue for the 2022 Winter Olympics. Because the hills surrounding Beijing have very little snow, 300 snow guns are brought in to create an artificial piste for the Games. While the world is watching the Winter Olympics, military analyst Jeffrey Lewis is investigating a set of mysterious images from the Russia-Ukraine border. For months, he has been watching the area around Belgorod.
Those of us working with commercial satellite imagery, we're seeing the enormous ring of steel and death encircling Ukraine. It didn't look like any other image that we had ever seen.
We have real concerns about Russia's unusual military activity.
Russian troops tend to park their vehicles in predictable patterns, essentially camping. We spotted a unit close to the border. This was a combat unit that was intended as the spearhead of an invasion. All of the vehicles were lined up on the verge of going someplace. Then we see a huge traffic jam show up on the highway between the location of that armored unit and the Ukrainian border. So we know the invasion is going to start before we are likely to get another picture of this unit. By the time we get another picture, it will be gone and the war will have started. So I'm calling and texting reporters this image saying, look, there's going to be an invasion. But no one can see what we see.
Jeffrey Lewis informs the US military of his fears. He is just one of many analysts alerting the world. But the Russians dismiss their claims. But on February the 24th, they strike.
I was living in the left side of Kyiv. I woke up from sounds from bombs or rockets and tried to understand what is going on. It was very scary.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences.
You can see destruction unfold from space. But you can also see creation.
My first mission just kind of blew me away. You really see that we're all interconnected on this living, breathing system. And those aspects that nurture life do appear frighteningly fragile.
In England's Bristol Channel, microscopic phytoplankton multiply in their billions to turn the sea green, a vital food source for other marine life. Off the coast of Korea, satellite images show strange bar-like patterns, seaweed farms, a response to the world's growing taste for sushi. And as February comes to an end, off the west coast of Canada, satellites capture one of the most remarkable events of the year. In British Columbia, the sea around Hornby Island turns white. Millions of Pacific herring return from the open ocean to their native shores to lay eggs. These milky white waters are billions of herring eggs seen from space.
With the herring come salmon, whales, seals, sea lions. Almost everything eats them. To witness this tremendous coming together of life, you are in a very special place and moment in time.
After 3 weeks, the herring swim back to the deep ocean. Until next year, when they'll return to Hornby Island. March 2022. As the month begins, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is gathering pace. Satellites show 100,000 Russian troops and over 3,000 tanks pouring over the Ukrainian border from the north, east, and south. Evidence that is confirmed by reports on the ground. The Russians attack with missiles and artillery. In the chaos, it's hard to get a clear picture of what's happening. But from above, it becomes obvious. Satellites are monitoring Kyiv at night when missile strikes on key infrastructure plunge the city into darkness.
The country is being attacked from all directions, and the fear now has to be that some of those Russian troops are heading here to the capital.
A military convoy 65 kilometers long can be seen approaching Kyiv from the north. Many believe the city will fall within days. Images from space pick up thousands of cars heading in the opposite direction towards Ukraine's western border as civilians try to escape. 22-year-old Sofia Volovic was in Kyiv when the war broke out.
I started my way to the train station. I felt very nervous because Russians, they started to bomb. Your blood is cold, but you still need to walk. It was very scary.
Over 3 million people rushed to get out of Ukraine. Sofia and her family are among them. This exodus creates 30-kilometer-long queues of cars and people that are visible from space.
I was on the border and I was there at 5 a.m. It was a massive queue. I've spent more than 11 hours in the queue to cross the border.
While millions of civilians leave the country, satellite images pick up a new development. North of Kyiv, the Russian army convoy has ground to a halt, 40 kilometers from the city. Russia's dream of a lightning victory has stalled, but the war continues. Satellites are crucial to seeing events on the ground in Ukraine. But they also monitor the sky above us, revealing key data about the weather that shapes our daily lives. On March the 14th, images from space show a strange phenomenon approaching southern Europe. The air above Spain and Portugal turns a deep red color. Cities like Granada are covered in a thin layer of orange dust. The dust is from the Sahara, but it's only from space that you can see the true scale of the phenomenon. Every year, between March and July, westerly winds blow across North Africa and the Sahara Desert, picking up millions of tons of dust as they go. Normally, this dust blows west across the Atlantic, but 2022 is different. Unusual weather patterns blow the dust northwards towards Europe, coating everything in its path, including ski slopes in the Pyrenees. As April comes to the Northern Hemisphere, spring is in the air. The tulip fields of Holland are in full bloom. In New York City, Central Park turns green. And in Luping County, China, acres of canola turn the fields a vibrant yellow.
From space you can see that the Earth is this beautiful blue marble, and more than 2/3 of the Earth's surface are covered by water. My mission was for half a year. When you have been up there for months and you can see the coral reefs, you are longing to just dive down, have a jump into the water.
The biggest coral reef of them all is Australia's Great Barrier Reef. Easily visible from space, it's the largest living structure on Earth.
Knowing how diverse the life is around the barrier reef, we see how much our planet is forged by these big oceans.
But despite its size, the reef is vulnerable to damage from overheating. Summer 2022 sees record-breaking heat in Australia. Satellite data shows the water around the reef is almost 2 degrees hotter than in a normal year. Data from space also shows that large areas of the reef are bleaching. Caused by warming water, bleaching is dangerous, but not necessarily fatal. Later in 2022, satellite data shows the seas around Australia have cooled. Researchers discover the coral is recovering in 2/3 of the Great Barrier Reef. But 1/3 of the reef is still battling to survive. All through April, on the other side of the world, satellites observe another fight for survival: the continuing war in Ukraine. By late April, Russian columns can be seen withdrawing from the Ukrainian capital. Russia's offensive on Kyiv has failed.
Our army destroyed whole plans of Russians. Better we died if give the city to Russians.
Satellites reveal devastation across the country as the Russians pull back. And something more sinister. In Manhush, images from space reveal freshly dug mass graves. In a churchyard in Bucha, another mass grave is identified. Investigations start into possible war crimes. In the south and east of the country, the Russian shelling continues. Civilian targets are hit. In Mariupol, 40% of the buildings are destroyed. In the drama theater, hundreds of families have taken shelter. They've even written the word children outside. Here, as many as 600 are killed. This shopping mall in Kremenchuk suffers a direct hit. It is month 2 of the war, and there is no end in sight.
When you're looking down on the earth and you realize that people are fighting each other as opposed to this view that you have of people all being part of a single planet, it's really saddening.
Images from space can see into every corner of planet Earth. They can reveal changes in parts of the planet where humans seldom venture. This is Glacier Bay in Alaska. These are floating ice floes off the coast of Greenland. And this is the Conger Ice Shelf in Antarctica, an area bigger than New York City that melted in 2022. At both poles, ice has been melting faster and faster in the last few decades. Satellite imagery has been key to monitoring these effects of climate change. 1,200 miles north of Norway is the Arctic Ocean archipelago of Svalbard. As the days lengthen, scientists are using satellite imagery to analyze how the loss of ice is changing the behavior of one of the Arctic's crucial indicator species, the walrus.
Despite being big and powerful, they're also increasingly vulnerable to the climate crisis. They use sea ice as a platform for resting on between feeding trips. They use it as a platform for breeding.
Recording walrus numbers by boat along the thousands of miles of Svalbard's coastline would be impossible. So Rod and his team use satellites to count walruses from space and record their location. His work shows that disappearing ice flows force walruses to congregate on land.
The problem with this is that there may be 10,000 or more walrus all crammed onto this one beach. If the walrus get disturbed, they'll stampede. And as they stampede towards the shore, they risk crushing some of the young calves, and that can be fatal.
Satellite images help Rod and his team observe walruses, seen here as individual dots, in parts of the Arctic that are inaccessible to humans. This data gives a baseline for researchers hoping to save a species threatened by climate change. But satellites can also reveal good news about our planet. In Antarctica, Rob's team were poring over images when they spot something surprising. A brown trail across the pristine white ice. They realize the trail must be penguin droppings. This leads them to search for penguin colonies in completely new areas. And they find them, including on Cuvier Island, on the edge of the Antarctic Peninsula. There was first one new colony, and then another one, and another.
Penguin colonies can range from a few individuals up to more than 100,000 birds in one location. We can spot penguin colonies where no human beings have ever been before. So it's really powerful using satellite imagery.
Satellites help us study the behavior of wildlife in the most remote places. But they also help us see human gatherings. Whether that's for sport, like these Super Bowl fans at the Eagles ground in Philadelphia, leisure, like these beachgoers at Santa Monica, California, or politics, like this crowd in Pyongyang, North Korea, who was spelling out the slogan, "Single-hearted unity." June is the month music festivals came back to Britain after COVID-19. In Hyde Park, there is a series of concerts headlined by the Rolling Stones. And in Somerset, Glastonbury Festival, the biggest of them all, returns. In 2022, it features both its youngest headliner, Billie Eilish, and its oldest, Sir Paul McCartney. In London, through a gap in the clouds, satellites catch an even bigger crowd gathering at Hyde Park Corner. Just some of the estimated 17 million Britons across the country celebrating Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee. 70 years on the throne. While Britain parties, on the other side of the globe, in the heart of Central Asia, Afghanistan is under the heavy hand of Taliban rule. Largely ignored by the world since 2021, it would hit the headlines again in June 2022. On the 21st of June, 9 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface, a magnitude 5.9 earthquake strikes southeastern Afghanistan in the region of Khost. Radar technology shows how much the Earth's crust has shifted. The red area, about 5 square kilometers, has risen 40 centimeters, while the blue areas have dropped. Scientists calculate this deformation releases an energy equivalent to 37 times the power of the Hiroshima nuclear bomb. Photos from space are used to assess the damage in remote villages that have lost communications.
What people are telling us is that there are villages up in the mountains which have been completely flattened.
Updated daily, images from space guide rescuers to the areas that need the most assistance. Watching from space, satellites give a unique perspective as the war in Ukraine grinds on through May and June. Before the invasion, Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe. New images reveal previously flourishing fields pockmarked with craters from incoming shells. The Russian invasion has a devastating effect on Ukrainian farms. In 2022, thousands of acres of ripe wheat are set ablaze. Farmers risk shelling and landmines to work in their fields.
І зможе підірватися на ній. Це теж небезпека.
These images capture the aftermath of Russian strikes destroying grain stores filled with millions of tons of wheat. But there isn't just evidence of destruction. There is also evidence of theft. And satellites offer the proof. This image from Sevastopol shows grain being poured into a Russian ship. 8 days later, the same ship is spotted 2,500 kilometers away. It's unloading in Syria, one of Russia's key allies. Through the summer, Russia is systematically stealing Ukraine's agricultural produce.
You are hearing the actual signals transmitted by the Earth-circling satellite, one of the great scientific feats of the age.
Ever since the first satellite, Sputnik, was launched in 1957, their numbers have increased exponentially. There are now over 5,000 in orbit, of which more than 900 are involved in direct Earth observation. One of the latest, the James Webb Telescope, doesn't look down at Earth. It was built to look up into the heavens. And launched with a mission to uncover the history of our universe.
There is the view from the upper stage camera on the Ariane 5 looking at the James Webb Space Telescope.
In July 2022, the first images arrive, revealing the universe as never seen before.
These images are going to remind the world, especially our children, that there's nothing beyond our capacity.
Orbiting the Sun, the James Webb Telescope captures previously invisible regions with stars being born. The aftermath of two galaxies colliding. And an amazing detail of nebulae over 160,000 light years away.
My first flight was STS-109. It was a mission to go and service the Hubble Space Telescope. So I was really excited about the James Webb Telescope. We're just seeing the beginnings of it. I think the astronomers will discover things that we can't even imagine are out there in the universe.
The James Webb is already changing our understanding of the universe. And with an expected life of 20 years, it has only just begun. Back on our home planet, things are more immediate as a year of unrest continues. On the island of Sri Lanka, in the capital Colombo, satellite images show queues of cars lining up for petrol. The economy is breaking down.
People are suffering and the people are living with 1 meal per day. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? I'm so sorry to say this.
On July the 9th, tensions reach boiling point. The president flees, and thousands of protesters storm government buildings. Within days, queues form, so big they can be seen from space. People are lining up to see the presidential palace and get a taste of his lavish lifestyle.
Hi, Mom.
In Sri Lanka, satellites capture unrest in the streets. But around the world, they can also see people gathering for worship and celebration. In St. Peter's Square in Rome, thousands of Catholics gather. In Iran, worshippers assemble for prayer at the Hazrat Masumeh Shrine. And in the sacred city of Mecca, after 2 years of tight COVID restrictions, almost 1 million pilgrims are allowed to gather for the Hajj. But it isn't just religious pilgrimages taking place. 70,000 people gather in the Black Rock Desert, Nevada, USA, for Burning Man, the music and arts festival. They build a huge, meticulously planned temporary city. Conditions are extreme, with dust storms sweeping through. And after just 9 days, it returns to the desert. Until next year. In 2022, weather is one of the biggest stories of the year. In July, temperatures across the UK are in the 30s and rising. On the 19th, they soared to a record-breaking 40.3 degrees Celsius. As July continues, England's green and pleasant land is left arid and brown. After weeks without rain, an official drought is declared across much of the country. On heat maps of European cities, red and orange show hotspots of above 40 degrees. All of Europe suffers as its largest rivers dry up. The Rhine falls to a depth of less than 35 centimeters. And in places, the Po, Italy's longest river, disappears. In Spain, reservoirs shrink to record lows. It was the same across the Atlantic. Satellite pictures show huge water loss in some of the most iconic lakes in the US, such as Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the country. In 2022, heat wave and drought are a worldwide phenomena. As August comes, the conditions are in place for a record-breaking wildfire season. In the United States, satellites capture over 7,000 fires blazing in California alone, more than any other state. In Oregon, the Cedar Creek fire lasts for over 3 months. It's the most active wildfire season of the decade, destroying over 7 million acres of land. In Europe, data from space is used to battle the year's record fires, allowing firefighters to see the direction and speed at which the flames are spreading. Spain is ravaged by wildfires, with a 4-fold increase from an average year. In France, an area 6 times larger than normal is destroyed.
Tens of thousands of acres burned, thousands of people evacuated.
Large fires break out, even in places that rarely see them.
London Fire Brigade had its busiest period yesterday since World War II.
The flames were coming towards me up Church Lane, so I've ran as fast as I could.
While Europe and America are ablaze, satellites above South Asia capture a natural disaster of another kind. Startling images in Pakistan see whole villages vanishing under muddy floodwaters. The monsoon season brings rain every year, but in 2022, it's unlike anything seen before. Data from satellites show that by late August, southern provinces have received more than 5 times the average rainfall. Over 1 meter of water, and the effects are devastating. The Indus River and its many tributaries burst their banks, flooding 1/10 of the country. Almost half of Pakistan's agricultural land is underwater. Across the country, 2 million homes are destroyed and 1,200 people killed. It's the worst flooding in Pakistan's history.
I think seeing these natural phenomena from space should humble people. Climate change, it's absolutely happening. We have years and years of data, and we're seeing that happening now with more intense storms and flooding. We need to take it seriously.
In August, satellites capture celebration and disaster by the light of the summer sun. But when viewed from space, there are some things best understood in darkness. During the night, wealthy cities stand out. Rome, London, New York. Areas in poverty, without electricity, go black as the sunlight fades. But there's another reason the lights go out. War.
When I was on the Mir station, there was the Balkan conflict, which was quite obvious because you could see that Europe is beautifully illuminated. But then on the eastern side, you could see this whole region was pitch black. And of course, you know, there was a conflict.
While some wars make headlines, others are only really obvious from space. In Ethiopia, in the region of Tigray, the regional capital Mekelle is caught in a bloody and largely unreported civil war between the Ethiopian government and rebel forces. NASA satellites took a time-lapse of Mekele over 2 years as its power was slowly cut off. By August 2022, it was in almost total darkness. From space, satellites can see mysterious round indentations scattered across the Earth's surface. There is one in Canada almost 100 kilometers wide. Another, in the Arizona desert, is 170 meters deep. These craters are caused by asteroids crashing into the Earth at unimaginable speeds. Millions of years ago, a strike like this wiped out the dinosaurs. A similar impact today would destroy life as we know it. In response to this existential threat, NASA developed the DART mission. Almost a year ago, this tiny spacecraft was sent on a one-way trip to crash into an asteroid and redirect its course. On September the 26th, DART was ready for its suicide mission. This real-time footage shows what happened next. It smashed into an asteroid at 23,000 kilometers per hour, changing its course. The mission was a success. DART had done its job.
DART was definitely a triumph for NASA. What was so exciting were those images as the DART spacecraft were headed toward the asteroid and getting closer and closer. Just spectacular.
September the 19th, central London. The streets are empty of traffic as huge crowds gather to watch the funeral procession of Queen Elizabeth II, who has died at the age of 96. The longest-serving monarch in British history, she reigned for 70 years. While Britain mourns, satellite images catch the ripples of the Ukraine war spreading across Europe. In the Baltic Sea, near the island of Bornholm, off the coast of Sweden, there is vast quantities of gas bubbling to the surface. The cause is soon established. The Nord Stream pipeline has been deliberately sabotaged. On the 25th of September, huge queues of traffic can be seen at Russia's Georgian border. Days before, President Putin had announced that 300,000 men were to be drafted into the Russian army. In response, over 100,000 potential conscripts flee to Georgia, one of the few land borders Russians can cross without a visa. September is also a tumultuous month in the natural world. Every year, in early autumn, when the oceans are at their warmest, typhoons and hurricanes bring havoc to tropical regions. From space, their terrifying power and beauty is awe-inspiring.
A hurricane looks beautiful from up there, but of course you know how devastating the forces of nature are on the surface. You feel, thanks God, I'm just coasting over it.
Hurricanes need water temperatures over 26 degrees Celsius to form. As the world's oceans heat up, 2022 sees more storms than usual, with greater power. There was Typhoon Hinam-Nor above South Korea. Cyclone Emnati near Madagascar. And on September the 20th, meteorologists spot a massive hurricane building in the Caribbean. It's moving fast and gathering strength. Satellite images show where the storm is, but vital information needed to predict its direction cannot be captured from space alone. Critical wind speed and pressure data has to be gathered from the eye of the storm. And that's where aerospace engineer Nick Underwood and his team come in.
The better job we can do up in the air, the better those forecasts are going to be, and the earlier we can warn people that they need to get out of the way.
As Hurricane Ian approaches Florida, it gathers strength and generates huge lightning storms. Nick and his team fly right into the eye, braving winds of 200 kilometers an hour.
Storm Ian was definitely the roughest flight I've been on. That was definitely the worst.
Satellite radar images illustrate the intensity of the rainfall. They show that at 3 p.m. on September the 28th, Hurricane Ian makes landfall in southwestern Florida as a Category 4 storm. It unleashes a 4.5-meter storm surge and dumps half a meter of rain. Millions are forced to evacuate. Thousands are rescued from the floods, and over 100 people die. As well as helping to track its course and strength, satellite images of before and after reveal the scale of destruction caused by Hurricane Ian. The deadliest storm in Florida for almost a century. As October begins, Russia is reinforcing its army in Ukraine. But the Ukrainians are finding new ways to hit back. In 2014, Russia had annexed Crimea. This satellite time-lapse shows them building an important strategic link between Russia and Crimea, the Kerch Bridge. In 2022, it became a major supply route for the Russian army. Until this. Both road and rail links are hit by a massive explosion. Photos from space show the burning bridge, and footage from the scene shows the ferocity of the blast. It is estimated that the bridge will not be fully operational until at least September 2023. But satellites do much more than simply follow wars and disasters. They also keep an eye on the natural world. Scientists spot gray whales off the coast of Mexico. Data like this helps track these elusive creatures. In the Southern Ocean, the Chatham Islands are home to nesting albatrosses. These isolated rock stacks are so inaccessible, scientists are using satellites to count the individual birds. Each of these white specks is an albatross, incubating an egg. And in East Africa, satellites observe the largest land migration on Earth. Each of these dots is a wildebeest, standing 2.5 meters tall and weighing around 270 kilos. Every year, 1 million of these creatures makes their endless journey from the Serengeti to the plains of the Masai Mara in Kenya and back again. The herds are huge, and the distances they cover vast. The sheer scale makes it difficult to study their behavior from the ground. But using images from space, researchers can examine behavior across hundreds of miles. Here, wildebeest are nose to tail. They are on the move. But here, across the plain, another group are lined up side by side, presenting a united front to the herd. They are grazing, and no one wants to be isolated. Here, the herd is strangely circling a tree. And this is why. Egypt, a cradle of ancient civilization. Its pyramids are visible from space 4,500 years after they were built. In November 2022, the world's eyes are on the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh for COP27.
Climate crisis is about the very life of the planet.
COP27 is focused on climate change, but Egypt's most immediate environmental challenge comes from another source: threats to its water supply. Since the time of the pharaohs, the Nile has been at the heart of Egyptian life, seen here in the center of a narrow strip of fertile land running through the desert. Now, Egypt's water supply is threatened by the country's growing population, which has doubled in the last 30 years. Images taken over several decades show the rapid expansion of Cairo. And east of the old capital, a new, carefully planned city is emerging from this parched landscape, designed to house 6 million people. The only source of water for all these government buildings, houses, and parks is the Nile. But over 1,600 kilometers south, near its source, Ethiopians also need the Nile's life-giving water. In 2022, satellites show the third filling of the Grand Renaissance hydroelectric dam. When full, it will hold back 70 billion cubic meters of water, more than flows through Egypt each year. For the Egyptians, this restriction of the Nile is a further threat to their limited water resources. Hydroelectricity is one form of renewable energy, but across the world, other clean power projects are springing up. Each of these dots is a wind turbine rising out of Britain's North Sea, with a blade diameter longer than a football field. Giant solar farms are also visible from space, like this plant near Seville, where a tower collects the light reflected by an array of mirrors. In China, solar panels cover the hillside by a provincial town. Other Chinese solar farms take on more creative shapes. If you look up on a clear night, you can see satellites passing overhead, and the most visible is the International Space Station. It's the third brightest object in the night sky, after the Moon and Venus.
2 of my flights were part of building the International Space Station. And so here was a collaboration of 5 different space agencies representing 15 countries that had gotten together and say, what can we do for the benefit of humanity?
Over the last 22 years, the space station has been visited by 263 astronauts from 20 countries. One of them is Thomas Reiter, who traveled to space twice, 10 years apart, and he observed the human impact on the Amazon rainforest.
When you are looking down, you see these huge areas where the rainforest is cut, especially comparing my first mission and the second mission.
Satellites have been tracking the deforestation of the Amazon for the last 40 years. These images show the dense green canopy disappearing to make way for cattle and crops.
When you see it with your own eyes, I have to say I really got very worried.
In Brazil, a fifth of its rainforest has been destroyed over the last 4 decades. But November perhaps brought some hope. Brazil's newly elected president, Lula da Silva, pledged to stop the deforestation.
Não há segurança climática para o mundo sem uma Amazônia protegida.
The success or failure of his promise will be monitored from space for decades to come. Space technology can help us observe changes on our planet, but it also allows us to venture far beyond it. On November the 16th, Cape Canaveral, Florida, is shaken by the launch of the most powerful rocket ever built.
5, 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
It's been 50 years since humans stood on the moon. Artemis 1 is the beginning of a program to establish a base on the lunar surface. As it accelerates towards its escape velocity of 30,000 kilometers per hour, it's caught on camera by a passing weather satellite. Blink and you miss it. Leaving the Artemis rocket behind, the Orion spacecraft goes into orbit around the moon. From a distance of 400,000 kilometers, it transmits images of the lunar surface and the blue marble of the Earth emerging from behind the moon. December the 18th, the World Cup final in Qatar.
It was billed as Messi versus Mbappe, and in an utterly thrilling final this afternoon, Argentina are football's new world champions.
It's the culmination of a 12-year engineering project, one of the most ambitious of the century. Over the years, satellites captured 7 new stadiums rising from the desert, built by an army of migrant workers. But it's not just stadiums being constructed. An entire city called Lusail, housing 450,000, was built from scratch. It is the most expensive World Cup ever, but also the most controversial, with widespread accusations of the abuse of thousands of migrant workers. In Ukraine, the winter has arrived. In the south, there are celebrations of recent advances by the Ukrainian army and their return to Kherson. But in occupied Mariupol, satellites show the Russians are reinforcing their presence. New military buildings have sprung up. A screen around the remains of the city's theater is a graphic reminder of civilian deaths in Europe's most bloody conflict since World War II. The toll of the brutal attack on Mariupol can be seen at the cemetery, where 1,500 new graves have been dug. As temperatures plummet, both sides prepare for a long, frozen winter. In December, the Earth's ultimate light show, the Northern Lights, or Aurora Borealis, becomes visible in the northern skies. Mesmerizing from Earth, it is awe-inspiring from space.
One of my flights, we were actually kind of low enough that we were flying through the upper red tips of it, and you could hear this crackling on the radio, and it did actually seem like a sci-fi movie at that point.
These fantastical lights originate 130 million kilometers away in the sun. A specialist satellite called the Solar Dynamic Observatory uses extreme ultraviolet sensors to capture the activity of the sun's surface. Solar flares can be seen emitting vast amounts of radiation, equivalent to 1 billion nuclear explosions. Known as solar wind, this radiation smashes into our upper atmosphere, creating charged particles that emit light and travel along the lines of the Earth's magnetic field.
I was full of awe, really, to see something like that from such a different perspective. Viewing the Earth from space, it certainly transforms the way that you look and think about Earth. You see everything as one interconnected system, including all your family and friends, and everything you've ever known is down there on this planet. It's the place that we call home, and we need to take care of it.